Welcome, everybody, to the second of two interdisciplinary webinars on radicalism, extremism, and Islamophobia, from offline to online. I'm Leuven, a professor in communication science at the Institute for Media Studies at KU Leuven, Belgium, and I will be your host this webinar today, and very glad to welcome 5 speakers who will give their presentation in the next 1 hour and a half. Our time is limited and our audience is quite big, so we will only take questions through the chat box and the Padlet prepared for the students enrolled in the masterclass Media, Audiences and Identity. So please share your questions with us and we'll make a selection and ask them to the speakers in the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. After each presentation, I'll ask a short question to the presenters, allowing the next speaker to get ready for his presentation. Like the first webinar, this one is part of the activities of a project funded by the European Commission entitled Extremely United, aimed at preventing the spread of radicalization among youth in European countries. Due to the prominent rhetoric displayed by radical groups or individuals in the online world, this project assigns a prominent role to the online actions by supplying videos, podcasts, drawings, and other tools to empower the voices of young people who promote values of mutual respect and empathy. Moreover, in line with the objective and scope of the project, offline events will be organized to offer young people a space to express their creativity and favor social interactions. This approach not only targets youth as a potential vulnerable audience, but it also allows young people to play an active role in countering violent extremism. So what are the media in all of this? There is a rich body of research into mainstream media representations of ethnic minorities in Europe and North America. Within this literature, there is a consensus that the portrayal of cultural, ethnic, or religious minorities tends to be simplistic and negative. Media portrayals that negatively categorize minority groups and their members ignore the internal diversity of minority groups or simply highlight the differences between majority and minorities that can be interpreted as media-specific othering mechanisms. In today's webinar, we're dealing with the question how Muslims, with a focus on young people, cope with these media-specific othering mechanisms in general, and with discrimination and Islamophobia in more specific terms. So we ask ourselves, what is effective prevention? And what measures work online? What measures work offline? And how impact of interventions can be studied, measured, and evaluated. So this webinar seeks to provide a platform for the interaction between researchers and practitioners working in the field. Our aim is to broaden the research on the radicalism field by linking it to prevention of youth extremism and by bringing together interdisciplinary perspectives. So yes, coming now to the speakers, because this was like the context for today's webinar. Coming to the speakers, the first on our list will be Marie Vigoureux, who will present her research conversation on radicalization, voices from the quote-unquote.
I'm sorry, Professor Dans, I think you're muted. So we don't hear you anymore.
Okay. Have you heard me before?
Just the last few sentences.
Okay, so but you heard my introduction.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. So this was the context, actually, what I was trying to explain, making the difference, and also actually bridging between the first seminar and this one, because this one is linking different perspectives in research to the practice of youth work. And I was about to introduce you as our first speaker, because you are one of the colleagues at the Institute for Media Studies in your fourth year of your PhD research, and the presentation you're going to share with us is part of that, one of the chapters in your PhD, and it deals with conversations on radicalization, voices from the quote-unquote suspect community. And I also wanted to add that in your research, you try to focus on framing of migration, of refugees and radicalization, and trying to come up with alternative framing, alternatives and depolarizing communication strategies on these topics. So Marie, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you for this nice introduction. I'm trying to share my presentation here. Okay, does this work for everyone? Okay, thanks. So good afternoon. As Professor Dans gave some context just now, I indeed want to continue the conversation that was started yesterday by telling you more about our research, which is based on the framing of radicalization and our conversations we had with the suspect community. So yesterday, our colleague Tom Frissen already started moving the conversation from Islamophobia towards the radicalization conversation, so I'll continue there. I would like to start by saying that following the 9/11 attacks, it has been seen that media are reporting more and more negatively on Muslims, and then Muslims as an entirety, does not extremists, but as an entire group, are being identified as the out group, which strengthens the in and out group polarization. And this dynamic has continued following the more recent attacks in Western Europe. So the small example I have shown here, the words that have been used to describe an area in Brussels, so Molenbeek, the most notorious postcode, a seething den of Islamist terror, a no-go zone, really illustrates this dynamic. I'm trying to, okay. And this security discourse also influences the creation of a suspect community. So a subgroup of the population that is singled out for state attention as being problematic. This is not necessarily a result of suspected wrongdoing, but simply because of their presumed membership to that subgroup. So race, ethnicity, religion, class, gender, language, accent, dress, political ideology, or any combination of these factors may serve to delineate the subgroup. So this means that, for example, a young male, perceived Muslim from Molenbeek talking in an Arabic dialect or Turkish to his friends can be seen as dangerous solely based on these factors and not based on his behavior. So in previous research, we have focused on the way radicalization is framed in the Belgian debate. So that means that we wanted to see what are the different ways that radicalization is being defined in the Belgian public debate. Because as we know, in the academic debate, but it's the same in the public debate, there is no consensus on what radicalization is, nor how it should be solved. So if it is indeed seen as a problem that requires a solution. So there are different ways how radicalization can be defined, and with each definition, the suggested solution will also alter. So our previous research mapped all those different frames. And all the result of that research you can find in the listed publication. An example of such perspective on radicalization, a problematizing perspective, is this first one, which is the virus perspective, the virus frame. And the idea behind it is that radicalization is seen as a pandemic, a dangerous spread of ideas, catching on quickly. If you talk to someone who is radicalized, then you can be contaminated as well. So a solution would be that infected persons need to be isolated until they are cured, and we need to find an antidote that works. We didn't only find problematizing frames, so perspectives that see radicalization as a problem, but we also found counter frames which do not identify radicalization as a problem that needs to be solved. And a problem, example of such counter frame is this one, which is defining radicalization as a phase in life, as puberty. It's a phase that we've all been through. It's where you're experimenting with your identity, a moment where you test extreme ideas, boundaries, how far you can go. So it's not necessary to overreact as society is doing now. So in total, we found 12 different ways to look at radicalization, and there's 12 different ways to solve radicalization as well. And following this research, we posed ourselves the question, how does radicalization debate, so the dominating frames and also the radicalization concept in itself resonates with the targeted community, so the suspect community I was referring to before. We just wanted to discuss the different frames with the so-called suspect community, learn more about their view on the concept of radicalization and their view on the entire public debate. This is also why we translated the different frames into cartoons, because we developed a method to support these conversations, because radicalization is it's not the easiest topic to talk about, to bring up, because there's a lot of stigmatizing aspects on it. So we developed this new method to go about it. And then I have two main clusters of conclusions that I want to bring to you today. So in total, we talked to 40 young people, and the first conclusion is that the radicalization debate in Belgium as such is problematized. So the focus on areas such as Molenbeek and the focus on religion, it's very much brought up instantly as having an impact on daily life as well. So it's very much problematized. Media is focusing too much on certain areas. However, we see that in the way that these young people also talk about radicalization, the dominant perspectives on radicalization are also being used. So the problematizing view on radicalization, the process itself, are also problematizing. So there's also so references as a process of manipulation, having the wrong friends, being in the wrong neighborhood are also recurring in these conversations. So the one does not neglect the other. So problematizing the debate does not mean that the topic of, or the concept of radicalization is not problematized. And then the second conclusions are more clustered on the use of the method. We see that the cartoons are a very helpful way to support these conversations on very sensitive topics, because in the cartoons also humor is used, which we have seen as very helpful to stimulate approach between the interviewer and the interviewee, to lose stress about what we are discussing. So an example is this cartoon, and this cartoon represents the perspective of what is called, that someone who is called a radicalized person is actually someone who is on a so-called religious path. And the final step is then the step of self-sacrifice, to find forgiveness for earlier mistakes and to find paradise. So this is a perspective we found in the Belgian public debate, and we use the cartoon to address this with the young people. But this could be potential a difficult topic to discuss. But we have seen that by using this in this way to bring in humor, this has really helped. It has caused always in each conversation the participants to start laughing, first of all, which has really eased the conversation, and then open up discuss very personal experiences with the topic. So the potential stigmatizing and traumatic topics, this was a very helpful method to deal with it. And then lastly, the cartoons present alternative ideas to the dominant perspectives, which made it possible to reflect differently on the concept of radicalization and also open up on personal experiences. So also during this webinar, radicalization is understood in the context of religious radicalization. So there have been notions yesterday also on extreme right radicalization. But this cartoon represents the idea that radicalization can also be understood in a much broader sense. So what we see as someone who is radicalized, maybe this is just someone who is trying to find meaning in life, who wants to be part of a group, a part of something bigger, and then has the label radicalized put on himself, but that is really not fitting for the path that he is on. And in that sense that we could also see someone who is a vegetarian or who is a hooligan in the same way. So taking radicalization out of these dominant perspectives and opening up the conversations and looking at it from different ways really helps to talk about it and to open up the conversation. So I think this can also help in conversations, for example, with journalists or with everyone working on this topic, because it just helps you get out of the dominant perspectives you have on radicalization and challenge you to look at it from different perspectives. So these were the main conclusions I wanted to give to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. You had, of course, the luck to have a supervisor who is also a fantastic cartoonist, an artist. Yes. So this is not a given for every PhD student, but it's really nice that you made use of that cartoon elicitation technique to bridge the world, so to speak. But in fact, they were not so different in their meaning, in their understanding of the notion of radicalism then compared to what we find in the literature. Just, okay, they were emphasizing the fact that the differences were emphasized in the media way too much, I imagine. But the definition itself, how different was it?
So the interesting thing is that you see people are reacting against the dominant perspective, but then when you're talking about the concept, you see that the words used are the exact same words as these dominant perspectives, so that it's really something that we are all using in our language because it's the dominant language that is given to us when talking about radicalization. But indeed, it's very much a perspective of manipulation. That's the main idea. Someone who is on a weak point in life, let's say, and then encounters the wrong person and then is manipulated into doing some things that he would otherwise never have done. That I would say is the main perspective on how radicalization is seen. But it's just really interesting to see how someone can resist against this dominant perspective, but then you see how it's so dominant that we all have the same word use, and because you don't have any alternatives at hand. And then I think this research is really interesting because it offers you these alternatives and to give you a different way of looking at it and communicating about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also interesting that you mentioned it can be used by journalists, and I guess also by youth workers will have the possibility to talk about it probably also later on in the webinar. Okay, so this is now the introduction for the second speaker, who is Ans de Nolf, who will talk about her research on qualitative interviews with Muslim youngsters in Flanders, and especially talking about their coping strategies, their coping mechanisms with regard to perceived Islamophobia. So she holds a master degree in communication science from KU Leuven, and she will be talking about the experiences of young Muslims with expressions of Islamophobia. She's currently a junior researcher at the Institute for Media Studies and looking for ways to deepen as well as to broaden her research topic. Hans?
Yes, thank you very much for that sweet introduction. So, dear colleagues, friends, and everyone that is here today, first of all, I just want to thank you just for your attention and for contributing, also the other speakers. And I would follow that up with telling you that I wish my presentation would not be so relevant, that I've just researched a phenomenon that disappeared within thin air, or that isn't just there anymore, but I have not. Because Islamophobia is real, it is harming, and not only to those who suffer from it, but to our society as a whole, because it affects how we interact with each other, what opportunities are being given to whom, and just how who we perceive as deviant and who we don't perceive as deviant. So it's a concept with enormous impact on the groups involved, with consequences such as discrimination, unfair treatment at the hand of the justice system, social exclusion, a lack of protection of fundamental rights, and even violent hate crimes against perceived Muslims. But before I go any further, it is important to address that Islamophobia isn't an uncontested topic, but more on that later, because I skipped the part where I define Islamophobia. I'm going to turn to Martijn de Koning for that, which is going to appear right now. So Islamophobia isn't uncontested, like I said. There's a lot of discussion over it over the years in the public discourse, in the academic discourse, and in my view, endlessly discussing the use of the word won't get us nowhere, because it befalls its own stereotypes and own judgments. So I want to look past that and turn to Martijn de Koning, who gracefully explained the myth surrounding this item and why it should be used. And he defines Islamophobia as follows. So it's a set of prejudice, stereotypes, and discrimination that Muslims face because of a one-sided, negative, and stigmatizing interpretation of the religious tradition. It's on page 26. But that fear, hatred, and prejudice towards perceived Muslims will be simply called Islamophobia from now on in my presentation. And this Islamophobia has enormous impact on the groups it targets, but it still receives little recognition worldwide. So I hope webinars like this are a little step forward, because the central focus in social debates, but also in academic research, is often just problematizing Islamic culture rather than looking at the reasons why it's problematized or looking at how Muslims experience it. And these debates about Muslims are also mostly being held without even the participation of this minority group, whose voice is rarely heard in academic research. So this study kind of aims to remedy this by letting Flemish Muslims answer in their own words a very simple twofold question. So, and on the one hand, how do they experience Islamophobia? And in the other, how do they cope with it? And this is important because how a person deals with discrimination, contempt, or even racism affects both his or her physical and mental health, and even their participation within society. So this is what we found. All the informants, without exception, mentioned various prejudices and stereotypes associated with Muslims and Islam. I have listed a couple of them above here, I think. For instance, they felt contempt purely on the basis of their appearance. They did not feel welcome in Belgium. They thought they were viewed as opposed to Belgian culture, and that Belgians viewed them through a very one-sided us versus them lens. And then within that us part, there is simply no place for Muslims. So they felt rejected by the society. But they also added that this is mediated by various factors. So those factors determine if it happens a lot or in a lesser amount. And these factors are, for instance, the age of the aggressor, or just signs of the religion of the victim, or the gender of the victim, or even the place of residence of the victimizer. And most importantly, the contact that they have with the victimizer, or that the victimizer has with Muslims. And I think this is kind of part of the solution, but more on that later, because I asked a twofold question. And within our research, a typology was drawn up consisting of 7 coping mechanisms, 6 active and 1 passive. And the most common strategy turned out to be to put the experience into perspective by either displaying understanding for the victimizer or minimizing the experience. So I'll start with that last one. Interviewees insist that it was not that bad after all, and that Belgian society also had many positive sides, like you can work there, people are friendly, things like that. They strive to look at the bigger picture, at Belgium as a whole, not how it treats them, by downplaying their personal experiences of Islamophobia. And a specific type of this relativizing strategy is like the use of humor to diffuse dark situations, or even looking at their fate to draw support or use it as a guideline. Another way then is avoidance, and it consists, well, of avoiding the situation, the incident, anything that might lead to hostility towards them. This includes staying away from places, or adapting one's physical appearance, or denying one's religious convictions by making statements about religion that they assume to be in line with the Western values, just to be liked or to be accepted. And a third strategy is the communication strategy. I have listed a quote from Emir here, because they can talk about it with a lot of people. Like Emir talked to his imam, but they can talk to family members, peers, friends, or their partner. And this helps to get it off their chest and to deal with it. And it's kind of the opposite of the next strategy I'm going to talk about, because that is the suppressive strategy. And within this strategy, also all the strategies I listed are part of the active strategies. This is also an active strategy, because within the suppressive strategy, the psychological or physical experience is viewed as negative, but they won't admit it as negative, not to themselves, not to others. And at this way, it can be so suppressed that it's just utterly forgotten at one point. And then in some situations, like in an interview, it gets brought up and they have to deal with it all over again. And next up, my flow is not so fluent, but this one is very important. It's the conciliation strategy. Like I said at the beginning, putting it into perspective is the most used. This one came up a lot. It's displaying understanding for the victimizer and trying to remain calm, friendly, and understanding at all costs. So it's an important one, and I think it's kind of a beautiful one also, because they really try, you know. And the last one strategy is the reaction strategy. So in this strategy, they will react to the event of Islamophobia very directly, by either trying to prove the victimizer wrong, or trying to start a movement, or start something, or going into discussion, or they just want to do something about it at that moment. And I end my monologue with my one passive strategy, named the passive strategy, and it consists of not reacting at all. This lack of reaction is often meant to diffuse the situation, because it can strike one as being the only reasonable account of action. Or they don't know how to react with it. So it's also very different from the suppressive one, because in the suppressive one, they are actively trying to deny it. But in the case of the passive strategy, the incident is recognized but not reacted to, it's just left there. And depending on the situation, or whatever coping mechanism fits one independent person, all these coping mechanisms can be interchanged, combined, or used as a whole to face the hostile behaviors targeting them. And I'll end my presentation because in my opinion, it's not only up to the young Muslims to deal with it, to deal with Islamophobia themselves. We as a society can help. So with this typology of coping mechanisms, we can adequately support Muslim youngsters in these experiences with youth workers involved, or people to help them and to help them through these experiences. So the scope of the study even went a little bit further, because my informants also touched their own solutions to Islamophobia. And I really want to end with that one, because in the media, in education, there can be more information on Islam. There can be more nuanced information on Islam, and not only on Islam, on all religions as such. So it's important to look at that. But most importantly, I think, and they thought, it's connection. It's getting to know each other. This can be in connection projects or discussion groups, or by even just having a friendly neighbor. So how do I know all this? Well, under the expert guidance of Lee and Danis, I carried out a qualitative phenomenographic study. So a study where I try to understand experiences on the basis of, well, a limited amount of semi-structured in-depth interviews. These are interviews with a limited script, so I could ask questions when they popped up during my interviews. And I did it in the spring of 2020. So I very much look forward to continue this research, and perhaps with your help. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anne. So interesting, the typologies you came up with. I think it's a really important step in the research. And if we combine the knowledge that we learned yesterday from Poland, for instance, and from Quebec, Canada, do you think that, for instance, the national history there, or the social policies there might need a revision, perhaps, of your typology? Or do you think it's rather a stable typology that you might find in all of these countries?
Yeah, they could sure use a revision, because it's just Flanders I researched, and only my interviews consisted of 15 interviews. So it really has to be broadened, and with more ethnicities, more backgrounds, more national things to go in it. So I very much think they could use a typology as a starting point and make it bigger and profounder, and maybe add something or leave something out. So it's just a start of research, but I really want to go further with it. So I just want to put it out there and look what you guys think.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll hear from the practitioners now and make that bridge that we announced in this seminar. And the first practitioner's experience will come from Anne Trappers, who holds a PhD in social and cultural anthropology from KU Leuven and master degrees in cultures and development studies and literature. And she has carried out herself research on the integration of Romanian immigrants in European capital cities. As a program coordinator at the non-profit organization The Foyer in Molenbeek, she is responsible for the activities, for the planning of the activities, the reporting on the activities there. And she also conducted herself research on the current migration and integration issues in Brussels. The virtual floor is yours. You might be muted, I think.
Okay, I think you can hear me now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, so hello everyone, my name is Anne, and as Professor Danens already said, I'm working at Foyer, which is a not-for-profit organization based in Brussels. It aims at promoting the empowerment, integration of vulnerable people of immigrant background, to sum it up. And one of the things we do there is to offer workshops to children and young people, also adults, but mostly young people. And it's one of these workshops that I'm going to talk to you about today. If you're familiar with this subject, I'm probably not going to tell you something new, but I'll give you an example from the field and maybe highlight a few points that seem interesting. So following the 2015-2016 terrorist attacks, Foyer decided to create in its range of workshops also a workshop on the prevention of religious radicalization. And 2 workshops were created that were aimed at preventing religious radicalization. They basically had the same content, but they were aimed at different age groups. There was How Real is the Virtual for younger children, and then Media in Times of Fake News, which was aimed at teenagers. Those workshops take place on site at Foyer in a purpose-built room. And in terms of content, what do people do there? Well, they do activities on manipulating images, exploring themselves how images, photos, films can be manipulated. They learn about conspiracy theories, even come up with their own conspiracy theories. They learn about propaganda. What is propaganda? How does it work? And the methods we use are varied. We try to keep it interesting, not too heavy, not superficial either, but also not too dark. So there are applications, videos, quizzes, and it all actually builds up towards a conversation about the topic. In 2019, we had almost 1,200 participants, mostly school groups, mostly from the Brussels area, but also beyond. Now, how did we get there? How did we actually decide on the content that we put into it? We wanted to start with a small-scale research on the ground. So we wanted to know what the major issues were for young people in Molenbeek. What did they consider important issues? What was bothering them? And so on. So this took place in 2018. We spoke with 13 young people from Molenbeek. Anthropologists have these very small-scale samples. The average age was 16. There were 5 girls, 7 boys, and all had a Muslim background. We used the method that we often use at Foyer, which is a dialogue method. And it consists of conversations, in-depth conversations, 2-hour sessions. And actually the safe space setting is already presupposed by the method. So in order to have the conversation, you have to have a safe space. The findings from those conversations, as I said, will not totally surprise you. They confirm a lot of the research that has been done on this topic, and that you also recognize from other speakers. So the young people themselves, they identify, so we didn't, perhaps I should stress this, we didn't introduce a topic of religious radicalization or violent extremism ourselves, we just let it come up naturally. And in that context, the young people identified a sense of exclusion, a lack of perspective as a main source of religious radicalization. So specifically the fact that they feel that schools do not prepare them for the labor market, that they have been given up on, they feel they're not good enough, they may come from troubled families, they may lack role models. All of that creates a breeding ground, they say, for religious radicalization. And interestingly, they likened radicalization to a subculture. So they say Islamic State was in the years, especially leading up to 2015, 2016, it was suddenly becoming very fashionable. It was in fashion, and in fashion was the term that they used for it. They said it was a hype for a while. So it was, in their view, a lifestyle choice for young people struggling with identity issues, much in the same way that becoming involved with drugs or petty crime could be a way of coping with it. So, of course, even if Islamic State was no longer fashionable in 2018, we can clearly see that the risk of radicalization remains. So it is something that is always out there as a risk and something that we should be aware of. When they were talking about media, it turned out that so media are very prominent in their lives. They didn't see media as a direct source or a cause of radicalization. They say it's a tool that is being used, but it's not in itself a cause. And they say adolescents have always tried to create their own world in which adults and especially parents, teachers are not welcome. So, but it's of course an important tool. Media also very significantly a source of confusion. We don't trust the media, that's what they often said. And it's difficult to know what is really going on in the world. How can you know? So they were confused about it. And so because of the prominence of media in these young people's lives, and because also of that sense of confusion, we started to think of, well, maybe this could be a focus of the workshops. So we've been running these workshops for a few years now, and they are evaluated periodically. And then the facilitators note that especially the topic on conspiracy theories is often a cause of debate, because very many participants adhere to at least one of those conspiracy theories, and it's something that they are also eager to talk about. It doesn't mean that they are not willing to reflect on it critically. And this is also important to note. There is a certain openness also for debate in the context of these workshops, and especially beliefs that they hold and that are based on very limited evidence, they are willing to question. And that's because of the safety of the space, of course. They are not held accountable, they're not judged for any of the things they say they believe. This is what they value most themselves when they have to evaluate the workshops, where we can finally talk about this subject in a different way, in a different setting, in comparison with, for example, at school. They also feel they are really listened to. And again, this is something that confirms a body of literature out there. What facilitators also notice is what is advocated here, that is a critical approach to media, to verify your information, to check your sources, to question information you get, that this is problematic to some, not all of them, but to some youngsters it is. They are looking for certainty, and it's precisely one of the ways in which radical ideas can be attractive to them, because they offer they seem to offer simple solutions to complex problems. So in conclusion, I return to that safe spaces concept. In our case, it was a necessary condition to obtain some of the information we wanted to have at the start in preparation of the workshops. And it's also an integral part of the workshop itself. Now, in order to create a safe space, and this is something that also came out of our conversations before the workshops, it's important to know the context and to know who you are creating that safe space for. So what are the conditions that give the participants that feeling of safety? Who should be present? Who should be delivering messages? Who should be asking questions? And so on. But it's equally important to remember that those spaces should be open spaces in which young people can express their identity. For instance, what was very striking both in our preliminary research and in the workshops is that the young people, do not really like to be approached purely as Muslim youth. They themselves really project an urban identity. So they are urban youth. This is something that they share also with others. And even if they are proud of their Muslim identity, they don't see it as something that defines them, or their identity is not limited to that. So summing up, young people can begin to look critically at their own beliefs in the context of such a workshop. It's often an opening, it's a start. It's very often all you can do in the space of one workshop if it's limited. If you want a stronger impact, and a follow-up at school or at the youth club is necessary, of course, or you would have to do a series of workshops with the same group on the same topic, because time is also an important factor if you want to people to start reflecting and to really change their mind on certain subjects. But so it's often a start, and the safe space is precondition for such a start. So that's basically all I wanted to tell you. There would be much more to say, but our time is limited. So thank you for your attention, and if you have questions, I'm willing to answer them.
Thank you very much. Yes, please, if you have questions, put them on the chat box or on the Padlet, and we'll certainly bring them up at the end of this seminar. Anna had a question about the group. You were saying Muslim youth, they don't refer to themselves as Muslim per se, but as urban youth. I wondered, do you have homogeneous groups, or are they heterogeneous in the sense that maybe they know each other already before coming to the foyer from the class or the school they share? How do you deal with homogeneity or heterogeneity of the group?
In the case of the preparatory dialogue sessions that we had, some of the young people knew each other, others didn't, but they could relate to each other because they had a similar urban identity, as I said. So that was kind of the overarching identity. That was what they had in common. The people who come to the workshops, they usually know each other because they are from the same class or from the same youth group. So they know each other. So the heterogeneity that is there has already been worked with. We see a lot of different profiles. So the dialogue sessions were with Muslim youth, but in the workshops we also have many non-Muslim youth, and it generally works well. So it also adds to the questions that come up. It makes it more interesting.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Fascinating. So if you have questions, please do not hesitate. The next speaker I will introduce while he's perhaps preparing the slides is Jenab Aydin, who is a sociologist of religion and an expert on interreligious relations. And today he will discuss the formation of interreligious communities in Europe during the COVID-19 crisis, with a focus on the involvement of Muslims in these communities. Jenab is currently the director of the Tevere Institute, a center for intercultural studies in Rome, and the deputy secretary general of the Jacques Maritain International Institute, also in Rome. He graduated in political science and sociology at University of Bogazici in Istanbul, and he studied Catholic theology and interreligious dialogue at the Pontifical Gregorian University, ecclesiastical and constitutional law at Leuven University in Rome, and sociology of religion at the Pontifical Angelicum University in Rome. I suspect Jenab is in Rome now, from where he's talking to us as a lecturer at the Master of Cultural and Religious Mediation at the Faculty of Philosophy at the Salesian Pontifical University of Rome. It's a mouthful. Rome is crucial, and interreligious dialogue is another crucial aspect. Jenab, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry. Thank you very much for the generous presentation. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very excited to attend this meeting. I would love to be there, of course, but I'm very happy that we can just do it also online. Today, I'm trying to make this what you have mentioned at the beginning, trying to actually go between the theoretical part and the practical part in this very few minutes. And then just as my actual title suggests, I will try to very briefly look at how this interreligious communities, Gemeinschaft, are just emerging in this post-pandemic Gesellschaft. It's not really it's not post already, but I would like to just mention it post-pandemic because it's already started that we have to face a new type of society and with reference to and what we are actually living at the moment. Okay, very close, just very briefly, what I really understand, the terms that I'm using, most of you are related to social sciences. That term, that dichotomy, first of all mentioned by German sociologist Tönnies when he was a very young sociologist, was on the 33, and then Weber actually brought the meaning that we are mostly using after more than one century, this dichotomy. Here I will try to look at how this term communities, especially in terms of religious communities, which is much more developed by another German sociologist, Hans Kippenberg, how does the religiously, I will say, formed communities are in relation with the society in general. But here again, I'm referring to Weber because Weber went beyond the understanding of Tönnies and saying that that's always a Vergemeinschaftung and Vergesellschaftung. The community link, just the idea of the formation of communities are always in relation with the formation of society in a fluidity and ever-changing interactive relationship. That will be more or less my approach, but I will try to also, add some dimension vis-a-vis, the Weberian understanding of that. Here, when we are trying to understand these communities, we are not only stuck with the religiöse Gemeinschaftlichkeit, the religious community formation, but of course, now this is just starting with the offline, the interfaith, interreligious relations are part of our society, especially in the last 60 years, I will say. And here, of course, when we call these communities as such, and that way they come together and they form the interreligious, sometimes interfaith, then the intra-religious, then some of the Muslims come together, Christians come together, and they form new ways of communities whenever they interact with other religious communities. I'm not getting to all to this, differences of the adjectives, but now we are observing that realities started with the so-called offline world, now with the pandemic, and then we are observing that this is also emerging in the online world, and then this interaction and the language that we are using and the strategies that they are using coming together are multiplied, and then it actually forces us to study further, and also for the activism part gives more opportunities, but also some challenges. Here, I will just briefly, I would like to, before going to my cases, I would like to clarify maybe my position. Here, usually we are so much accustomed with the concept of participant observation. I will say it's, what I will try to share with you is actually have three aspects of that: activism, participation, and observation. Here, because in the cases that I will show you, I be part of this activity of these cases, even an activist of interreligious interfaith dialogue. That's why, that would be my observation. One first case is, among many others, a case from Jewish-Muslim dialogue in Rome. And let me tell you, because maybe just your curiosity will be, how would we all related to our topic of extremism and radicalism and the Islamophobia. And here the very idea is through these activities, intercultural, interfaith, inter-religious dialogue, my approach is how can we actually, create spaces and moments in which that we can just product a counter, or it's better, a sustainable positive narrative in order to combat extremism, radicalization, and Islamophobia. The case is with a Jewish-Muslim dialogue in Rome. Actually, I started a meeting among Muslims and Jews, young people, in which we tried to put together young people during Ramadan and sharing kosher food in an iftar dinner. In Jewish-Muslim dialogue, there are opportunity challenges for our topic because on the one hand, as you know, especially Jews and Muslims who live in Europe and elsewhere, most of the time are so much conditioned by the Middle Eastern political questions, and most of the time they could not really find ways to dialogue each other and to create a new approach to extremism and the radicalization and Islamophobia related to anti-Semitism, because most of the time Jews and Muslims find themselves in some Western contexts attacked by the more or less the same political powers. In this case, we observe lots of asymmetric convergences between anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and that's why during this meetings, during this dialogues, Muslim and Jewish young people could also understand, directly what they actually experience. And here another aspect is religious communities and secular state. The formation of religious communities as religiöse Gesellschaft is always related to secular state, and that's the interactive and ongoing relation, because the very position of the secular state, as we put it, the secular also Gesellschaft, society at large, have been interacting with religious communities and changing this change in the approach of the secular state towards religious communities, change also the the identity of these communities. And in these meetings, we had to observe how Jews and Muslims sharing their experiences from past today. Another example from Germany, I just limited myself with Germany and Italy. There are several examples from Spain and UK. There is an interesting project, House of Fun. I'm also activist. I'm their project ambassador in Rome, in Italy. That's a project that I'm closely observing. And that idea is creating a holy space for two religions in which Muslims, Christians, and Jews pray together, based in Berlin, but reaching out to the world. That's another aspect of being a religious community. Just usually we are stuck with the idea of very local, having idea of Gemeinschaft is local, Gesellschaft is larger. But here, in these cases, you see that the transnational identity of religious communities take them to another aspect. In the case of the interreligious Gesellschaft, interreligious communities, we see this reaching out have different faces, in terms of how to transform some ideas, negative ideas, prejudices into a positive law. In this case of House of Fun, prayer is a distinguished but not separated common response to extremism, radicalism, and Islamophobia, in which the three religions help each other, to how to respond, to the social problems in terms of praying together and putting this prayer into the public sphere, so that maybe also non-religious part of the society could, give a value to this collaboration. And here, I'm just skipping that. This is a little bit more theoretical. The last thing, as a questions, as conclusion, I would like to pose: how are interreligious communities perceived by the followers of the participant religions in order to, measure their success for the larger communities? Could they actually transform their approach towards the problematic areas? How can we revise our methods and approaches to understand better the development of interreligious communities with the help of digital sociology? And the third question is, how do the interreligious narrative and the political agendas of nation states interact with each other in terms of combating extremism? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Janab, for this presentation. I was wondering, so you were presenting the case House of One, so this is a safe space, if I compare it to what Anne was talking about before you. You are eating together, you're praying together, and you're also reading texts together, I imagine, because you were talking about narratives. So are you also trying to work towards consensus building, or is the goal understanding and respect for each other's ideologies?
Actually, this is the big question, because, you know, whether dialogue is most of the time, even when I'm just doing a formation for younger people about dialogue, and they say, what is next actually? The first idea, of course, I mean, I think we have to really put them into different contexts. There are some contexts you have to be at the level of just to know each other, because there's a huge religious illiteracy among people belonging to different religious traditions, even for the rest of the society. Even they are not interested in religion as a faith, you are more interested in religions in order to, you know, understand what's really going on in society. But there are some different levels. On these different levels, I would say maybe more advanced levels, of course, there are more proposals how to interact with each other on the common platform, common basis of the human rights, democracy, and the constitutional basic rights and freedoms, so that they can just, how can they actually make some concrete proposals to find solutions of the social problems.
Okay, thank you. So questions are welcome on our chat box and also on the Padlet. For the time being, I'm going to present our fifth and last speaker of today, and he will take us to Belgium again, to the city of Mechelen, and the development of an evidence-based and evidence-inspired model. And our speaker is Alexander van Leuven, who is a social worker and an anthropologist working on a PhD in media anthropology. His current research concerns emic perspectives on youth alienation expressed through communication, both interpersonal and mediated communication. The project he's working on is a collaboration between the city of Mechelen and the University of Leuven, and it is intended to inspire both evaluation methods and also to improve local countering or preventing of violent extremism policies in Belgium and also in the neighboring countries, because the project is funded by European Commission's Interreg 2Cs program. Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leen, and welcome, colleagues, and also the caseworkers who took some time from Antwerp and Mechelen and several local entities to follow this seminar, because it is really important that we manage to do research that actually means something for you in the field. So, and that, of course, takes time. Umit, I can't see my presentation. Do you see my presentation? Now I see it. Do you see it?
We do see it.
Okay, good. So, I'm gonna talk mostly about how research can be, how we can do valorization of the research that we do. So I can't really go really in depth of the research that I've been doing, but it's mostly been participant observation, ethnography, in Brussels, with co-supervision of Foyer back in around from 2009 to 2012, and then in Mechelen for developing a Mechelen model on de-radicalization, which we didn't do, and I will explain to you why. So I'm going to take you through some stages of research, conceptualization, problematization, theorizing, and valorization, to see to what aspects and how I make sure there can be some valorization in the end. And this firstly starts with the concept and the problem that we are looking. Radicalization draws the interest of terrorism studies, but some of these great terrorism scholars have already asked us to deal with it elsewhere, and especially from a preventative focus, which is that of the cities that have these local coordinators, as I have been in Mechelen for 7 years. It's really important to have the right concept and the right problem. Sometimes for policymakers, this is very semantic, and I would, well, it is, but that's not a negative thing or a pragmatic thing. It's a real issue. And if you look at this drawing of this woman, I don't know what's happening on your screen, but it's constantly disappearing in mine. You can see an old woman and a young lady in this picture. And you could say, yeah, that's funny, but what does it really mean? Well, there's a big difference, because if there's if this lady is on a tram, for instance, and it's a young lady, then you might flirt with her, but it's an elder lady, you might consider that inappropriate. And the other way around, if it's an elder lady, you might give up your seat for her, which could be really, really important. It's really not working quite well here. So this also goes for radicalization, which is a concept that is used a lot in Belgian policies. And we need to make sure we have a constructive conceptualization of radicalization. And mostly in Belgium, we have this static understanding of what is radicalization. We see that seemingly youngsters turn to extremism in a very short time. And seemingly this is done because of some ideology. And of course, that is a legitimate observation, but in order for a prevention service to really deal with it, this isn't really constructive. You need to intervene early. You want to prevent radicalization, to a certain extent, prevent violent extremism. And therefore, you should more look at a process, and it is a process. Even if you consider just the extremists part of it, the violent parts of it, and if we look at this scheme based on research from the Leuven Institute, you see that when people were recruited into to a violent network. Yes, Ans, please take over the screen and show the presentation. Should I stop sharing? Yeah, I'll stop sharing. So what you would be seeing on this slide of, yeah, this is of course an older version, but I'll manage. Could you go to a lower slide? A lower slide. With the thing from Leuven Institute, you see that when you are recruited, when youngsters went to Syria and they wanted to join some paramilitary organization, they would end up into the one that was willing to recruit them. And I often say in trainings, if I would give you a gun and ask to shoot the person next to you, in this setting it's a little weird to say, but you can imagine, you wouldn't be able to do so. It's not normal that a human being can do so. You need to be socialized in this. And the research of Quillingham Institute shows that to go into this violent extremism, you need to be socialized into it. And the same goes for the process before recruitment. And that is actually the process that a prevention service should be looking at, right? Because you want to prevent that recruitment, and therefore you need to be looking at grievances. And in the policy formation of the Belgian government and of specific local cities in Belgium, they have been looking mostly at criminological studies, which provide you a very broad multi-domain research, but still are very focused on the phenomenon, on these stories of police that they see 3 girls in miniskirts that are, and 3 weeks later they wear a burqa or a niqab and they want to go to Syria. That's not all that's going on in these youngsters' life, right? And if you want to be preventative, you have to look at the things that come before, and you have to look at what Amy Jane Giele has described in a political and behavioral research, that it's about social alienation and frustrations. It's about our society, that in globalized society that encompasses many risks, of which Islamophobia is one, and which has been discussed before. And you need to work on these risks. And these risks appear when young people have frustration in their identity formation. But often in my talks, I hear people saying, well, we're not young anymore and we still deal with frustrations in identity formation. It could be a breakup, it could be problems with societal developments, it could be Trump for you, it could be politics that are closer. And for the prevention work, you should have research that focuses on that part of radicalization, that you can intervene on a more early setting. And I wonder if Ans can show me the last 2 slides of my show, because it's then I will just open them on another computer screen, and then I can, because I can't do them from by heart. So you need this. And what is very much missing in policy making is the communication research that talks about how Thomas Friesen was talking about that yesterday. How jihadis, but I think this could go for other extremist groups also. No, he didn't talk about that yesterday. This is difficult. Anyway, communication research that looks into how jihadis try to stimulate Islamophobia and incite political reactions that are overzealously targeted at Muslims, as Marie talked about, what incites these experiences, right? So from this focus on what happens before recruitment into a criminal organization, and you're looking at frustrations that happen in a risk society, a prevention service can really look at early detection of societal frustrations that are not dealt with, are usually dealt with within families or in schools or in youth work, and to really strengthen what happens in that youth work. So policy is not looking at this communication research, and this is why the Orpheus project, which Leen has talked upon, will be developing methods to go online and to have groups like this online and discuss difficult problems like Anne has talked about with youth, so they would not feel inclined to go into, to be recruited into criminal organizations for lack of institutions to surround them, like the family I mentioned, or the youth work. Right, so we will also be doing evaluation in our phase of these projects, and I will be doing these emic youth perspectives that Lane talked about in the introduction, as to provide policy with more insights into what happens, more than what happens into violent extremist groups, but what really happens before recruitment, which is, I think, more vital to developing policies of prevention. Thank you, and I'm really sorry that my PowerPoint didn't work. Yeah, we tested this, but.
Thank you, Alexander. Yeah, technology, sometimes it lets you down. And I just wanted to ask a question about the fact that now there's COVID and there is the lockdown, and it hinders, of course, casework, it hinders youth work. And how do you deal with going online? And actually, it's a question that can also be shared with Anne and Jenab. How do you deal with the transition from offline to online?
Yeah, this is a big challenge, and especially at the moment that safe spaces for youth to discuss difficult problems are endangered, because most of these vulnerable or youth susceptible to recruitment, or youth susceptible to a lot of COVID contamination in Mechelen, live in very poor housing conditions. So they lack this institution of the family there. They want to go outside, but they can't be outside always. So police is really harsh on them. Again, the going to the youth house is limited right now. So you need to go online, and first then, in this thinking of valorization, you look at the theory, and then you can find research that tells you that there is a more important role for the moderator in these safe spaces when it's in line. Okay, yeah, that's a very valid point, I think, but that doesn't give a practitioner any tools yet. So we need to go and experiment, and the first findings in participant observation that I've done in these online trainings are that in some ways it's even easier online, because youth come online and they really know what they want in these sessions, and they come to the point really quickly. I've seen youngsters open up discussing things that makes them really vulnerable about racism of their parents, for instance, that you would normally not easily do in an offline setting. Also, because the recruitment for these safe spaces online is done in a broader sense, you see that the social mix is bigger, and that you have ethnic diversity, gender diversity. So there are some benefits that we're trying to build on, and I think that's also very, very important to the policy making, that you look at the strengths that you have, as we have done in Mechelen when I was a local coordinator, and also now when we have to go online, you look at the strengths that the online work has. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anne or Jenna? Anne, could you perhaps also comment on your experience with the online world?
Yes.
Well, sorry. Please. No. First ladies, please.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Well, I'll be very brief. We have we've also started going online and offering, for instance, parts of the workshop online, but it's new. It does work. Some things that Alexander says are recognizable to me, like young people are used to this. They do open up. On the other hand, sometimes there is a bit of dynamic missing that you have in offline meetings that you can't seem to recreate online. Also, if you want to work with a lot of mixed media, it's not always so easy. It's a learning process, but it's definitely something that's possible and that can be done. It offers some perspectives, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you need the technical support, so that not only a moderator, in my experiences, but really technical support, because it's very challenging, but very necessary to have these technical support. Yeah.
Well, yeah, this online actual meetings, I mean, they have some advantages, like just, I mean, you can reach out to people that they could not be part of these meetings. In my case, I can just give the example, another project that we're applying, the scriptural reasoning. In scriptural reasoning meetings, now we can reach out the whole Italian territory. Formerly, we could only invite people only in Rome. But of course, here I have to mention another aspect, that is our actually imagination. I would say we have an imagined audience in which everyone has the perfect access to internet. But on the other hand, it's not true. And that's also another exclusion, not for young people. We are not focusing on young people, but in some cases, the young people. I was trying to reach out some young people that were in the refugee camps. They had several problems over there. I mean, you know, when there is the offline meetings, you can just invite those people, or you can reach out to the refugee camps. But when in online world, you have to have a nice internet that you have to pay it monthly, and then that you have a nice setting in which not only just you live in one room with 6 people, so that, you know, and you cannot really concentrate what you are saying and listening. So advantages and disadvantages are there, but I think just I'm agreeing with my colleagues. We have to analyze, you know, this, you know, truly just to understand what will be the future of these meetings.
Interesting, because you were bringing up the refugee people and also refugee camps. So you're reaching out to these people because you had a question on that group as one of the most vulnerable groups imaginable, and someone in the chat room asked about it. So you have this experience, and do you have special programs with them? And the same question goes for Anne and Alexander.
Well, I had some experiences. I tried to involve people who are living in the refugee camps, especially not only, I mean, as you know, young people from the Muslim communities, but in order to understand what does it really mean to live one's own faith in such a setting. Because again, it's not only just interacting with other people in interfaith whatever meetings, but then they can just give you another sense of, because again, our definitions, you know, religion or somebody has a faith, but then in the practice, it's completely different experience that you live your faith at your home, in your church, in your mosque, than you live it in a refugee camp. I mean, there are lots of challenges, and that was actually very eye-opening for the people who are actually participating from their home in these meetings, and they could just having more empathy, and then that could also relate to the comment that could also make the people closer to the reality, what's really going on. Just not, oh, why these refugees are so easily manipulated, whatever. No, but they can raise an awareness of these people.
Anne or Alexander, you want to add something?
Well, the city of Mechelen has done some extra efforts toward refugees in the past years, accommodating more refugees than standard, which was necessary and mandated by the national government. But they took it wholeheartedly, but we haven't been engaging with them online, I must admit, or the city hasn't been doing that. But what is interesting in the interaction with these groups is that time and again, normal people like civilians and professionals are a little bit scared of interacting with them. So we get referrals with the stupidest things that they, at weird hours, refugees would be blocking some parts of the streets or squares, and then we would ask, did you ever ask them to move aside or to stand somewhere else? And then the professional said, well, oh no, we haven't. Well, let's try that. So there is a bit of, if I can use this experimental term that Marie once used, a stranger danger feeling around that. Yeah, But we haven't taken it online because these talks with professionals about just addressing them, I think, have been really effective in prevention terms. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. On meanwhile answered already online. Yeah, because the situation in Molenbeek, I guess, as one of the first entry points in Belgium, is quite specific and different from Mechelen. But online is not, the preferred mode of interaction. Online has its difficulties. Offline, face-to-face is more, appropriate. I have a few questions here on the platform for Ans, actually, about the coping mechanisms that you need, the typology. And one of the questions was, which one of the coping mechanisms was helping these people the most? And then another one referred to, is it possible to generalize the coping mechanisms to other groups, like to LGTB communities? What do you think of these two questions, your reaction?
Yeah, the first part of my answer is quite the same because I didn't research that. But if I have to make a founded guess, I would say that the coping mechanism that help the most isn't the right question to ask because it's so different for each person. It's a way of coping with it, and there are coping mechanisms that have more positive outcomes. Like if you still try to remain friendly at all times, you meet someone who is really harmful to you, and you keep being polite, then maybe it clicks with the other person. You know, he will be like, oh, maybe they're not that bad, and he will adjust himself. But that's a guess, and I think in that way, these are the best coping mechanisms, but it's so person specific that you can't really talk about helping or just be picking what's best based on my research. And regarding to the LGBTQ community, LGBTQ plus community, or other minority communities, I found that my research a little bit in literature upon minority groups. So yes, they can be helpful, but it still is so specific that if I want to make a claim about another minority group, I have to research it, or I at least have to bring other research into my answer right now, which I don't have at this moment. But I think they're very good questions, and they should be, and my research can be used to answer those. It just needs to be broadened first.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Maybe I could also bring up the cartoon issue that was presented as our first presentation, and it was used as a cartoon elicitation method to bring out and facilitate the conversation and the dialogue. But I can imagine also that showing cartoons, as we all know, with Samuel Paty and what happened in Paris may be much more tricky. And actually, I came across an article this morning in the newspaper in the Netherlands where there was this commemoration day for Samuel Paty in a Catholic college in Rotterdam. And this was a teacher who had clearly a philosophical slant. He had his classroom with lots of pictures of, for instance, spiritual leaders, spiritual teachers like Krishnamurti, or a spiritual teacher or a Pakistani woman, for instance, the activist Malala, but also Anne Frank was there, Socrates was there. So lots of images. And among these images, there was a cartoon drawn by Joep Bertrams. And Joep Bertrams got a prize in 2015 as one of the best cartoonists in the Netherlands. And what it showed was a decapitated man in a Charlie Hebdo shirt who sticks his tongue out to the jihadist who just decapitated him. And this cartoon was hanging in his class for 5 years already. And last Monday, Muslim girls came into his class and wanted the cartoon to disappear. Because they said that the teacher was guilty of blasphemy. So other teachers came in and there was a lively discussion, but the end was that the cartoon was taken off. But that was not the end. That was the end of the day, but not the end of the riot, because the whole thing continued on Instagram and Facebook. Now there's a whole police investigation, and the teacher actually went in hiding. And the director of the school has set up a care team ready to talk to the students and say, okay, together we have to make sure that we keep on talking, that we keep the dialogue open. So this is kind of an interesting case that perhaps you would use also in your safe house contexts or in your in your activities. I wonder, how would you, because it's really a question that lecturers have, that teachers have, how would you bring it up in your activities? I guess it's a question for Jenab and Anne, and later on maybe also for Alexander. Jenab, maybe would you want to comment on this?
Sure. Okay. This, of course, that is a very actual problem, especially among young Muslim people. But I just, based on my interviews and participant observations in some meetings, I would say there is a huge. I'm going back to the concept of religious illiteracy. I mean, this should be really studied well. These reactions, how they developed this react, because they would like to, name it as like blasphemy. But if you just look at the mainstream Islamic texts and documents or resources, you can't see that Muslim young people are so much worried about very main pillars of Islam at that level. You see, there is a very reactionary and identity politics. I mean, in Europe recently, in the last decades, we see from different levels. In Italy, for instance, as you know, an atheist parent didn't want to have crucifix in the classroom, and then it made a big issue that arrived to Strasbourg. I mean, in all the time, just attacking something, just bringing out something and canceling something. I think this is the general idea should be studied more and more. It's not only simply a religious issue, what is sacred, what is profane, but it is more and more becoming an identity politics in which these young Muslim people would like to see themselves in a new defined identity in the post-secular society, so that they can just, reconstruct their idea of what is really being Muslim in this post-secular European context. And that's why whenever in the workshops, in the focus group, we raise this issue. And recently I talked to some other young people. You see there's a huge confusion, about different levels. I mean, if you ask some other challenging questions about maybe some more important issue of Islam, they are usually very ignorant of them. But this is something, I will just say, there is a huge conversion between the people who would like to pose it as, the one concrete example of the so-called Islamic threat in Europe, and then the young people seeing this definition of, these reactions, they become sometimes, unfortunately, more radicalized. So there is a asymmetric collaboration between Islamophobia and radicalism, extremism, and I think that will be one of our important tasks to be tackled, and we should really understand the very dynamics of this asymmetric collaboration, so that we can maybe just find a way to create a new positive language, a grammar, to open up a new ways of looking at the same issue.
Thank you very much. Anne, you want to add something?
Yeah, just very briefly, I find it very interesting. That's why I just wanted to say shortly, I agree with Jenab. And interestingly, we do something similar in another workshop, not the one I discussed, where we actually do quizzes on religion to see what do you really know about your religion and about the religion of others. And there we also introduce the concept of memes. How are memes used, images how they're given a religious meaning, how are they used to express ideas on religion and identity and so on. And then you see that there's such a broad range of images being used across the board. So yes, I agree with you, that could be really a way forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alexander, the last word for you.
Thank you. So when I started out my work, I was looking at strengths to capitalize on, but I saw one big hiatus, and that was that for Muslim youth, if they wanted to develop their Muslim, the Muslim aspect in their life, that there wasn't really good trainings for them, and they would have to resort to things that weren't really strong, or they would have to follow classes 9 hours a week after regular school hours. So that was a lot. And I made an issue of this, but at that time it was politically not really well received to ask for more Islamic educations. Now it's a little bit more developed, and we collaborate with an organization called CPIRE, which used to be a youth work organization in Antwerp, but now has developed more on radicalization. And they had this this method they now call M-Talks, in which they bring together youth in a safe space, and then they ask for an expert. But this expert is thoroughly vetted for its knowledge of, for instance, Islam in this case, but it could be anything. It could be but also is pedagogical skills, not to going to ramble at the youth and say, look, in Islam it's like this and this and that, and voila, there you have it. No, to have them pedagogically go through the content with these youth in one or more sessions. So that's how the city of Mechelen nowadays deal with that. Also to look at those who don't find it in a normal way, because of course a lot of Muslim youth do find their development in a normal way, and even some that radicalize, quote unquote, and become really Salafi in their behavior because they think that compensates for things they might have done wrong. They are really well received by the rest of the Muslim community to say, look, you don't have to go so extreme about it. We all make mistakes. It's really a difficult path, and we will help you with that. But for those who fall through the mazes of that net, that's how Mechelen deals with it. Yeah.
Thank you all. Actually, our time is up. This is one of the aspects of a webinar, 1.5 hour, rather concise, but I think it was a very interesting webinar, very interesting presentations and also answers to the questions. Thank you also to the audience for being with us. Please keep following us on the Extremely United website. Thank you, everybody, for your attention and for your work, and take care.